Amelia Dyer was born as the youngest among her siblings, consisting of 3 brothers, Thomas, James, and William, and a sister named Anne. Their family resided in the small village of Pile Marsh, located to the east of Bristol. Her father, Samuel Hobley, worked as a skilled shoemaker, while her mother, Sarah Hobley, suffered from mental illness due to typhus. This condition subjected Amelia to witnessing her mother's violent fits and assuming the responsibility of caring for her until her passing in 1848. The experience left a lasting impact on Dyer, shaping her understanding of the symptoms exhibited by individuals who lose their mental faculties due to illness. During her childhood, Dyer had an older sister named Sarah Ann, who tragically died at the age of 6 in 1841. Another sister, also named Sarah Ann, passed away a few months after her birth in 1845. Around the same time, Dyer's extended family had an illegitimate daughter, who was eventually accepted as the granddaughter of her aunt and uncle, William and Martha Hobley. Following her mother's demise, Amelia resided with an aunt in Bristol before embarking on an apprenticeship with a corset maker. In 1859, her father passed away, leaving the family shoe business to her eldest brother, Thomas. By 1861, at the age of 24, Amelia severed ties with at least one of her brothers, James, and took up lodgings in Trinity Street, Bristol. It was during this time that she entered into a marriage with George Thomas. Notably, George was 59 years old, and both parties falsified their ages on the marriage certificate to reduce the significant age gap. George subtracted 11 years from his true age, while Amelia added 6 years to her own age. Unfortunately, this misinformation later became widely reported, leading to considerable confusion about their actual ages. After marrying George Thomas, Amelia Dyer pursued a career as a nurse. However, fate led her to cross paths with a midwife named Ellen Dane, who introduced her to a lucrative but sinister way of making a living. Amelia discovered that she could use her own home to provide lodgings for young women who had become pregnant out of wedlock. Instead of offering them support and care, she would exploit their vulnerable situation by either arranging adoptions for their babies or allowing them to perish due to neglect and malnourishment. Ellen Dane, who had shared this baby farming scheme with Amelia, eventually had to flee to the United States to avoid the authorities' attention. During the Victorian era, unmarried mothers faced immense challenges in earning an income, as the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act absolved the fathers of illegitimate children from any financial responsibility. These women struggled to raise their children in a society that stigmatized single parenthood and illegitimacy. This dire situation led to the rise of baby farming, where individuals acted as adoption agents or foster parents, receiving regular payments or upfront fees from the baby's mothers. Many businesses emerged, offering shelter to these expectant young women until they gave birth, leaving their unwanted infants to be cared for as nurse children. The financial gains from this practice often exploited the desperate circumstances of the parents involved. Wealthy parents seeking secrecy would pay a substantial fee of up to £80, while fathers who wanted to conceal their involvement might negotiate around £50. However, impoverished women were more common in this scenario, and they were charged around £5 for the services provided. Unscrupulous caretakers would resort to starvation as a means of saving money and even hastening the baby's deaths. Noisy or demanding infants were sedated with readily available alcohol and/or opiates. One popular choice was Godfrey's cordial, known as Mother's Friend, a syrup containing opium. Numerous similar preparations were also used. Countless children lost their lives due to these dubious practices, as opium killed far more infants through starvation than directly through overdose. Dr. Greenough, conducting an investigation for the Privy Council, observed that children kept in a continuous state of narcotism would lose their appetite and receive inadequate nourishment, leading to death from severe malnutrition. However, the coroner often attributed such deaths to debility from birth, lack of breast milk, or simply starvation. Mothers who attempted to reclaim or inquire about their children's welfare faced various difficulties, while some were too frightened or ashamed to report suspected wrongdoing to the police. Even the authorities encountered challenges when attempting to trace missing children. Amelia Dyer found herself immersed in this dark world after Ellen Dane's departure. With the birth of her daughter Ellen Thomas, Amelia had to step away from nursing. In 1869, after the passing of her elderly husband George Thomas, Amelia found herself in need of an income to support herself and her child. Dyer had a strong desire to profit from baby farming. In addition to taking in pregnant women, she advertised her services to nurse and adopt babies, requesting a large one-time payment and suitable clothing for the child. In her interactions with potential clients, she portrayed herself as respectable, married, and promised to provide a safe and loving home for the children. In 1872, Amelia married William Dyer, a laborer in the brewing industry from Bristol. They had 2 children together, Mary Ann, nicknamed Polly, and William Samuel. Eventually, Amelia separated from her husband. During her time as a baby farmer, Dyer decided to take a more sinister approach to save money and avoid inconvenience. Instead of allowing the infants to die naturally from neglect and starvation, she resorted to murdering them shortly after their arrival, allowing her to keep most, if not all, of the payment she received. For a while, Dyer managed to avoid attracting the attention of the authorities. However, in 1879, she was finally apprehended after a doctor became suspicious of the unusually high number of child deaths under Dyer's care. Surprisingly, she was not charged with murder or manslaughter but received a 6-month sentence of hard labor. The leniency of the punishment compared to lesser crimes of that time sparked astonishment among some, while others questioned Dyer's mental state, claiming that the experience had nearly destroyed her. Upon her release, Dyer attempted to resume her nursing career. However, her mental instability and suicidal tendencies led to multiple stays in mental hospitals. Curiously, these periods coincided with her disappearances, conveniently allowing her to avoid detection. As a former asylum nurse, Dyer knew how to manipulate her behavior to ensure a relatively comfortable existence as an inmate. Dyer's mental instability appeared to be exacerbated by her early involvement with alcohol and opium-based substances. Her substance abuse may have contributed to her psychological instability. In 1890, Dyer cared for an illegitimate baby belonging to a governess. When the governess visited the child, she grew suspicious and checked for a birthmark on the baby's hip, which was absent. Prolonged suspicions by the authorities eventually led to Dyer experiencing or feigning a breakdown. At one point, she attempted suicide by consuming 2 bottles of laudanum, but her long-term opium use had developed her tolerance, allowing her to survive. Despite these setbacks, Dyer returned to baby farming and murder. Recognizing the risk of involving doctors to issue death certificates, she began disposing of the bodies herself. The dangerous nature and scale of her activities attracted unwanted attention from the police and parents searching for their children. To evade suspicion and regain anonymity, Dyer and her family frequently moved to different towns and cities, always assuming new identities. In 1893, Dyer was released from her final stay at the Somerset and Bath Lunatic Asylum near Wells. Unlike her previous breakdowns, this experience was particularly unpleasant, leading her to avoid any future commitments to asylums. 2 years later, she relocated to Caversham, Berkshire, accompanied by an unwitting accomplice named Jane Granny Smith, whom Dyer had recruited from a brief period in a workhouse. Dyer's daughter, Mary Ann, known as Polly, and son-in-law, Arthur Palmer, also joined them. They later moved to 45, Kensington Road, Reading, Berkshire, during the same year. Dyer convinced Smith to pose as her mother in front of unsuspecting women who entrusted their children to her, attempting to present a caring mother-daughter image. In January 1896, Evelina Marmon, a popular 25-year-old barmaid, gave birth to a baby girl named Doris in a boarding house in Cheltenham. Being unmarried, she decided to seek adoption for her daughter and placed an advertisement in the miscellaneous section of the Bristol Times and Mirror newspaper. Her ad simply stated, "Wanted, respectable woman to take a young child." Marmon's intention was to go back to work and eventually reclaim her child. Coincidentally, next to her advertisement, there was another one that caught her attention. It read, "Married couple with no family would adopt a healthy child, nice country home. Terms, £10. Marmon responded to the ad addressed to Mrs. Harding, and a few days later, she received a reply from a woman named Dyer. The letter, purportedly from Oxford Road in Reading, stated that Mrs. Harding would be glad to provide a loving home for a baby girl and expressed a desire for companionship and the comfort of having a child. Dyer described herself and her husband as plain, homely people of modest means, but with a genuine fondness for children. She assured Marmon that her daughter would be cared for and loved in their home. Evelina Marmon initially hoped to pay a more manageable weekly fee for her daughter's care, but Mrs. Harding insisted on receiving a one-time payment in advance. Marmon, facing difficult circumstances, reluctantly agreed to pay the £10, and a week later, Mrs. Harding arrived in Cheltenham. Marmon was taken aback by Dyer's older age and sturdy appearance, but as Dyer seemed affectionate towards baby Doris, Evelina handed over her daughter, a box of clothes, and the agreed sum of money. Overwhelmed with sadness at having to give up care for her child, Marmon accompanied Dyer to Cheltenham Station and then to Gloucester. She returned to her lodgings feeling utterly broken. A few days later, she received a letter from Mrs. Harding assuring her that all was well. Marmon wrote back but received no response. Contrary to what she had told Marmon, Dyer did not travel to Reading. Instead, she went to 76 Mayo Road in Willesden, London, where her 23-year-old daughter Polly was staying. There, Dyer found a piece of white edging tape used in dressmaking and quickly used it to wrap twice around the baby's neck, tying a knot. The death would not have been immediate. Dyer later admitted, "I used to like to watch them with the tape around their neck, but it was soon all over with them." Both women allegedly helped wrap the lifeless body in a napkin. They kept some of the clothes Evelina had packed, while the rest was destined for the pawnbroker. Dyer paid the unsuspecting landlady the rent and even gave her daughter's boots as a gift for her little girl. The following day, on Wednesday, April 1, 1896, another child named Harry Simmons was taken to Mayo Road. However, lacking spare white edging tape, the length used around Doris's body was removed and employed to strangle the 13-month-old boy. On April 2, both bodies were placed inside a carpet bag along with bricks to add weight. Dyer then made her way to Reading, where she knew a secluded spot near Caversham Lock on the River Thames. There, she forcefully pushed the carpet bag through railings into the river, ensuring the bodies would be concealed beneath the water. Unbeknownst to Amelia Dyer, a chilling discovery took place on March 30, 1896. A package was retrieved from the Thames in Reading, caught by the attention of a bargeman. The package, which Dyer had negligently discarded, was insufficiently weighted and easily spotted. To everyone's horror, it contained the lifeless body of a baby girl, later identified as Helena Fry. With limited resources in the Reading Borough Police's detective force, Detective Constable Anderson played a crucial role in the investigation. Through meticulous analysis of the wrapping paper and microscopic examination, he managed to decipher a faintly legible name, Mrs. Thomas, and an address. Moreover, a label from Temple Meads Station in Bristol was also discovered, providing additional leads. While this evidence pointed towards Dyer, the police still lacked strong proof connecting her directly to the heinous crime. They obtained further information from witnesses and collaborated with Bristol police, intensifying their suspicions. Detective Constable Anderson, along with Sergeant James, decided to put Dyer's residence under surveillance. They learned from intelligence sources that Dyer might flee if she sensed any suspicions surrounding her actions. With the intention of either establishing a direct link between Dyer and her criminal activities or providing a reliable opportunity for arrest, the officers devised a plan involving a young woman acting as a decoy. As fate would have it, Dyer anticipated the arrival of her supposed new client, the decoy, but instead found detectives waiting on her doorstep. On April 3, Good Friday, the police conducted a raid on her home. The putrid odor of decomposition overwhelmed them, although they found no human remains. However, numerous incriminating pieces of evidence were discovered. These included white edging tape, telegrams discussing adoption arrangements, pawn tickets for children's clothing, receipts for advertisements, and letters from mothers inquiring about the well-being of their children. Upon investigation, the police calculated that within the preceding months alone, at least 20 children had been placed under the care of a woman known as Mrs. Thomas, who was now revealed to be Amelia Dyer. It also came to light that she was planning to relocate, this time to Somerset. Such a horrifying rate of murder led to estimates that Mrs. Dyer may have been responsible for the deaths of over 400 babies and children throughout several decades, making her one of the most prolific murderers in history. Dyer's arrest took place on April 4th, and she was charged with murder. Additionally, her son-in-law, Arthur Palmer, faced charges as an accessory. In April, as the investigation continued, the Thames was dredged, resulting in the discovery of 6 more bodies, including those of Doris Marman and Harry Simmons, Dyer's last victims. Each baby had been cruelly strangled with white tape, which Dyer callously explained to the police, was how you could tell it was one of mine. 11 days after entrusting her daughter to Dyer, Evelina Marman, whose name emerged in items retained by Dyer, bravely identified her daughter's remains. During the inquest held in early May, no evidence was discovered indicating any involvement of Mary and/or Arthur Palmer as accomplices of Amelia Dyer. As a result of a confession written by Amelia Dyer herself, Arthur Palmer was acquitted. The confession, written during her time in Reading Jail, is presented with the original spelling and punctuation preserved. Sir, will you kindly grant me the favor of presenting this to the magistrates on Saturday the 18th instant? I have prepared this statement, as I may not have the opportunity then. I must relieve my mind. I do know and feel that my days are numbered on this earth, but I also feel that it is an awful thing to draw innocent people into trouble. I do know that I will have to answer before my Maker in heaven for the awful crimes I have committed. But, as God Almighty is my judge in heaven and on earth, neither my daughter Mary Ann Palmer nor her husband Alfred Ernest Palmer had anything at all to do with it. They never knew that I contemplated doing such a wicked thing until it was too late. I am speaking the truth and nothing but the truth, as I hope to be forgiven. I and I alone must stand before my Maker in heaven to answer for it all. Witness my hand, Amelia Dyer. April 16, 1896. On May 22, 1896, Amelia Dyer appeared at the Old Bailey and pleaded guilty to the murder of Doris Marman. During her trial, her family and associates testified, expressing their growing suspicions and uneasiness about her activities. It was revealed that Dyer had narrowly escaped being discovered on several occasions. Additionally, the testimony of a man who had seen and spoken to Dyer when she disposed of the 2 bodies at Cavershamlock played a significant role. Her daughter provided compelling evidence that ultimately led to Dyer's conviction. Dyer's only defense was insanity, as she had been committed to asylums in Bristol twice before. However, the prosecution successfully argued that her displays of mental instability were a calculated strategy to evade suspicion. It was suggested that both her commitments coincided with moments when Dyer feared her crimes might be exposed. The jury wasted no time in reaching their verdict, taking only 4.5 minutes to find her guilty. During her 3 weeks in the death row cell, she filled 5 exercise books with what she claimed to be her last true and only confession. On the night prior to her execution, a chaplain visited her and inquired if she had anything to confess. In response, she handed him her exercise books, stating, "Isn't this enough?" Interestingly, she was summoned as a witness in Polly's murder trial, scheduled for a week after her own execution date. However, it was determined that Dyer was legally considered deceased upon receiving her sentence, rendering her testimony inadmissible. Consequently, her execution was not postponed. On the eve of her hanging, Dyer received news that the charges against Polly had been dropped. On Wednesday, June 10, 1896, James Billington carried out her execution at Newgate Prison. When asked if she had any final words on the scaffold, she replied, "I have nothing to say," just moments before being dropped precisely at 9 a.m. It is uncertain how many more children Amelia Dyer murdered. However, inquiries from mothers, evidence of other witnesses, and material found in Dyer's homes, including letters and many babies' clothes, pointed to many more. If you found this video intriguing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating content.